There we
Hey,
are.
hey, hey. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Where's Your Heart, where we champion vulnerability as a core human strength. As always, we appreciate everybody for tuning in. Every single Monday, we are here at 6 Eastern, 5 Central, and 3 Pacific. We got a lot to talk about. We got a really interesting show for everybody today.
Yeah.
If anybody is plugged into any aspect of what's going on in society, they know that over the past week, just like a lot of our previous weeks, there's been a whole lot that's been happening in the news, uh, COVID-19 to what's happening with BLM, Black Lives Matter, but then also politically and economically. So we're going to touch on a lot of those things today. But first, like we always like to start, I got to introduce my man 20 Grand, my man Royce. How you feeling, man?
Well, if my camera would cooperate, I'd be feeling better today.
It's going. We're getting flashes on that one.
I know, yeah. So we turned it off. All right,
All
we're
right,
back to the other cam. But
you
anyway,
good?
it feeling. I mean, honestly, it's been a really rough last few days, and I don't even know why.
Mm,
But at the same time, I'm like, what do you expect? There's a global pandemic. Uh, we've got what are we at now? 80, 90 days of protests in a row. Like finally a country that's waking up and maybe starting to say no to some
mm.
bullshit. Um, like there's just a lot. So yeah. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm also, I do a lot to like take care of myself. So
Right.
when stuff like this happens, I'm always like, it's like you get done servicing the car and then the damn thing breaks down. The first thing out of my mouth is always, "What the hell?" Like, I just took care of you. Can't you like do your job? But I mean that's the I don't know. That's the truth of the matter.
Yeah,
We're human beings. We're not fucking machines.
we are
But I
not
think
machines.
that's also the core of the conflict right now. We're not machines who are just going to go out and function in a global pandemic the way we did before. Uh, and the machine of this country very much wants us to be that way. We're not going to go out and function the way we were before around race, or I would add gender, or any of the other isms that our country is so good at creating bias around.
I'm
Um,
listening.
so,
I promise you,
oh yeah,
I
you're
can't get this camera
no,
thing
I
to
know.
work today.
I had to get my stuff uploaded too. It's all good, but like I think that's the challenge is we're seeing we're experiencing. So this is the challenge. We're seeing this stuff on the national stage. It's in
Right.
every news broadcast. It's every time we turn around. There were two people shot in Kenosha last week. There was a person shot over the weekend in Portland, all around some of the protests that are going on and counter protests.
Okay.
Um, but the thing is, we're not machines. And so we also, in addition to seeing that out there, we're having these internal experiences. And some days it's rough. Like I've had more days in the last week when I didn't work out than um, any single week in probably the last year. Like and I'm a 6 days a week guy on that. So it's that's where we're at. Suck.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. I guess from a gratitude standpoint, though, when I
Yeah.
think about, so there's a lot going on this week.
Yeah.
And we lost someone. We talked about the movie Black Panther, and Chadwick Boseman
Yep.
is a person that we lost. And so you know what, I'm gonna set this one up a little bit because I do want people, I want our viewers to kind of see something as we go through this. So I want to set this one up so we can watch something.
Mm.
And I really want, just, it's really important, as I've been thinking about what what it must have taken to move forward and do some of the impactful things that he was able to do under those conditions, right?
Yeah. And let's be clear, this is a man that's our age or was our
Yeah,
age.
yeah,
Like,
same age,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Someone watch some of this.
Very personal, just watching the kids experiencing. And for me, I would say, there are um, two little kids, Ian and Taylor, who um, recently passed uh, from cancer. And throughout our filming, I was communicating with them, um, knowing that they were both terminal. and what they said to me and their parents said they're trying to hold on till this movie comes. And I, to a certain degree, you hear them say that and you're like, wow, that's like, I gotta get up and go to the gym. I gotta get up and go to work. Um, I gotta learn these lines. I gotta work on this accent. Uh, you know, Seeing how devoted all of my castmates are, and knowing that will be something meaningful to them. But it's to a certain degree, it's a humbling experience because you're like, this can't mean that much to them. But seeing how the world has taken us on, seeing how the movement is how it's taken on a life of its own, I realized that they anticipated something great. And I think back now to a kid and just, you know, uh waiting for Christmas to come, waiting for my birthday to come, waiting for a toy that I was going to get a chance to experience, or a video game. I did live life waiting for those moments. And so it put me back in the mind of being a kid, just to experience those two little boys, anticipation of this movie. And when I found out that they
Take your time with it.
yeah, it means a lot.
So, that really stood out for me because there was so much that when you think about the grace that it took to talk about that, when you think about when I watch that now, I'm almost positive that he knew and he had his
Yeah.
diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
And I think that pause was him being so present and so aware of, one, processing his own emotional and anguish, but then realizing, even if that at that moment, if he would have said something that was about him and that was true, would have taken away or could have taken away from the movie itself. Just the composure and grace that he had. So that's what I'm grateful for. I mean, I kind of set that up with a long video, but just even in that moment, to how he went through the whole process, and even those within his circle or close to him who knew about it but didn't say anything about it, to me it was extremely impactful. And I'm really grateful to have not only the movie Black Panther, as a beacon for reflection within the Native Black American community, but also for the way he handled himself within the movie, but outside of the movie. And I really have a new level of respect, and he went up a whole lot of pegs for me in my life. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm grateful for. Just that example, the way he modeled that.
Yeah. Yeah. I I I don't have words there. Like, you, you spraying this on me, man. No
You're right.
heads up. He's just like, here, we're gonna get the emotional gut punch out of the way right off the bat today. God,
Yeah,
yeah,
but could you imagine that? I mean, he wanted to say, I'm talking to these young children who have cancer, and as do I. So
yeah,
yeah, it's a lot, man. But it's a good point of reflection for me, and I'm grateful for that example.
yeah. Hey, somebody who, like, it was not just a role that he was playing. He also understood the larger stage.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
I look forward to the day when we don't have just one fucking movie to point to anymore.
Hmm.
I mean, we don't, but it's still like,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
um,
Variety. That's the word we
yeah,
use, right? Variety.
right,
Where there's more variety, because we
yeah,
focus so much on difference. It's about variety. So yeah.
yeah, and but I also, like, I have deep respect for people who still walk into those spaces knowing when you go big like this, um, you you become that model minority, and that's a painful shit role to be in.
Yes,
There's
it
a lot
is.
that gets stacked on your, yeah. You, what the fuck am I
Yes.
talking about?
Yes. I mean, not that I equate myself with him or anything, but just we have a whole nother show we need to talk about. But yeah, but having to do that much more and you know, just
Yeah.
the things that go along with it and teaching people along the way.
And
Yeah.
that he decided the way he was going to model that was by, like, he's an actor. He absolutely could have shut that whole thing emotionally down. He's done it a million times before,
Mm-hmm.
but he chose not to. He chose
Mm-hmm.
to just let it be what it was. And to watch the tenderness of his co-stars, to just, like, they didn't say a thing. They didn't interrupt him. They didn't speak over him. They didn't make it seem like this was weakness or any of that crap that we see when men cry on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Just hand on the shoulder, a hand on the leg, something that says, "Hey, we're here.
Yeah.
We got you."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. Just thanks for that, man.
Thank him. Thank you for holding
Yeah.
the space, man. So I don't know if this is a good segue, but your gratitude.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'd come back to having a space like this where we can have conversations like this. Like,
for sure.
It's part of what I'm excited about with today's guest is just like, you know, we get to have conversations that you and I tend to have, that we tend to have one-on-one in like a coffee shop or something, you know. TL likes to call them couch conversations. He's right too. He's nailing that too. But it's that kind of intimate conversation.
Yeah.
And we don't just have them alone anymore, that we get to share these conversations.
Yes.
And that's huge.
It is huge.
So,
and when people talk about privilege, I find that I'm growing into the fact that is a privilege, that people even listen and tune in. I mean, you know, and I don't even think I did this yet, but just thanking all of our listeners and viewers that tune in, that support, that do share, that are sharing right now, and that really believe and understand the importance of championing vulnerability as a core human strength, because that's what it is. And it's difficult. You know, it took me a long time to even start talking about it, let alone to make it part of an everyday practice. So, yeah, man, it's going to be good stuff.
It is. It is. Yeah. For a culture that defines vulnerability as weakness, we're saying no. Like, this is actually a core part of being a human.
Yes. Yes.
Powerful.
So then, speaking of that, you know, last week now, when we start to reflect on the last week, I mentioned this a little bit as we started, but yeah, it was a lot happened. It almost felt like we took 10 steps back. That's how I felt. Not that I thought that we were making, you know, a whole lot of progress, but it really just, you know, the narrative and things that have been happening. I'm like, wow, you know, we have another situation, right? Just call a situation for the sake of neutrality until we get more into the conversation. And so Kenosha just really stood out, man. It's I'm tired of everything, right? But I'm really tired of seeing this on television. I'm tired of it happening. How about that? I'm tired of it happening.
I'm tired of wondering what that child in the truck saw.
Yeah.
Like the pure terror that child's going to experience the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, you know, for all our listeners, all of our viewers, as you can imagine, we're talking about Kenosha and the police shooting that was there. But then really, you know, how does this tie into the larger narrative and where things are going to be going and what that looks like in the future for all of us? So one of the things that we wanted to do, make sure we're good, perfect on time too. Look at that. Is bring in a guest, bring in someone who has a point of view. Sometimes it's different, but most times it's a broader point of view. It's something that adds value to maybe even the way we hold space for each other here on the show. And so I'm really, really, really excited for our guest that we have coming on. This is somebody that I've known for, man, it's going 15 years or so. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about him is that from the first day that I met him, we started to dig into very deep conversations about pretty much everything. Like we can talk about a thumbtack and start to get into a whole conversation around the holes in it, what it means. Is it a miniature version of the universe? I mean, we'll go off in all different kind of tangents. But what I appreciate about him, though, is that every time I talk to him, whether I agree with him or not, he always leaves me in a state of reflection. Like I think about our conversation or something that he said afterwards and then long afterwards. And so every time we speak, which isn't all the time, we kind of always pick up. So it's a very interesting relationship. So a little bit more by the numbers for him. He's been married, husband for 24 years, which is something we could also talk about because that's rare as well. I mean, that's a whole nother show, but I don't know if we'll be able to touch it on here. He has 20 plus years of leadership experience, specifically in the U.S. Army. 4 children. Sorry, I shouldn't know that. 4 children, whom I know very well, and I've seen many of them grow up. And then he's had 2 deployments while he was a part of, or as being in the Army. So he has, real experience in a lot of places that are impactful in our life. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy his point of view. So I've been setting him up way too much for my man, Rashan McRae. What's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on, fellas? Hey, I appreciate you pulling in. Torian gassing my head up.
Hey, but listen, it's all true, man. I say that from the heart, man. Like, really, like, you are one of the very few people I can probably count on one hand that every time I speak to leaves me with something I reflect on. Like, man, I need to look into that. I need to read something a little bit more. So I appreciate that, man. I appreciate you too.
Oh, 100, man. 100. I mentioned to y'all in the pre-show when I was looking for a change to, start to mature my conversations and mature the people that I was around. Me running into you was a great thing for my personal development, and we've been talking and having the same conversation over and over again, and watching you develop from the person that I first met to the person that you are now, and to still have that same drive for helping people and doing those big things and seeing those parallels. It's been great for me. So big up to you.
I appreciate it.
Big up to y'all show. Just like I said, I was getting caught up on all your episodes. Y'all get real deep, and I'm ready for it. I'm ready to have those conversations.
All right, man. So we're gonna go in, and we'll get right into it. Well, first, how about this? First, I got another one for you. I'm gonna set up our conversation with something else that we can actually watch. All right. Go. All right, guys.
You plan to visit Kenosha, Wisconsin as well, another community that's obviously in pain?
Probably so. We've had tremendous success. As you know, we were finally able to get the go-ahead from the local authorities to send in the National Guard. We sent in the National Guard, and within a few minutes of the Guard, everybody cleared out, and it became safe. We have, that was 3 days ago. We've had absolutely no problem from that. We sent in 1,000 National Guard, and that's not even a big force.
I think yesterday you did comment on the killing of Jacob Blake. You said you didn't like how it looked. I wondered if you could comment about the other shooting that took place in that community.
Yeah, I see.
You mentioned the National Guard going in, law enforcement, but this was a young man, 17-year-old, who's facing murder charges for having shot 2 people.
Yeah.
There's some folks who've said conservatives are holding up this young man as, having done so within his rights to sort of self-protect. And I'm wondering if you've read much about this case, if you have concerns about ordinary residents with guns in situations like this and what dangers that might present.
Well, that's under investigation right now.
Oh, man.
All right.
I'm pretty sure we all fucking know what happens when white people get permission to fucking take out their biases, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said. What'd you say?
I said, don't we all fucking know what happens when white people have permission to live out their wildest biases? Like, didn't we fucking watch that?
Elaborate.
Like, I can't fucking see this shit without seeing assholes in fucking white cone hats and sheets and shit. Like,
so tell us how you really feel about the president's comments.
not a president. Like I wouldn't trust him to be president of toilet paper, but like, yeah, I mean,
So because there's a lot embedded in that, and that's why I wanted
Yeah.
to play that clip, right? I mean, they were talking about everything that was going on, but specifically what was happening in Kenosha. And so I'm
Yeah.
just curious, so we can start to have a discussion just around the response, right? Like what we actually saw, and then the response to it by different sides that people were actually having. Because of course, we're hearing a lot of different things.
yeah,
Well, I think that in the whole case, I think all of us can agree that it was tragic. In the video snippet that we were able to see, we we're thinking about what could have happened, because again, we're tired of seeing unarmed people being killed by the police. I mean, it's just that simple. Especially in this instance that we've been seeing over and over again. These weren't people doing egregious crimes that warranted that type of reaction. And seeing this over and over and over again has been it's been tough. It's been very tough. And you have to think about the generations that continue to see these kind of things.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid when we saw the Rodney King video, and you hear a lot of people talk about that. You thought that was the silver bullet. It wasn't that nobody knew these things were going on. It was that this was the first time the whole world got to see it, and you still didn't get any answer at the end of that. So as we move through these cases and seeing more and more of these things, and still not getting the answer has been the toughest part of this whole thing.
Hmm.
And when you
was 30 years ago now.
Yeah, that was
exactly
30 years ago. Yeah.
Like,
exactly, and you know, in the community, in the Black community specifically, you have these kind of discussions. I grew up working in a barbershop, so I think that was the biggest impact on me, is sitting around grown men having these discussions over and over again. And from the guys that were only a few years older than me to guys that were way my senior, and we would have these same kind of discussions about, what do you do in these kind of situations? And fast forward that 25 years, and we still talking about the same thing. It's very frustrating to have these conversations over and over and over again. And you try to figure out a way to get empathy from other people in lines with these conversations. And especially me, I put a lot of things in the finance frame. Just thinking about it from that point of view. How expensive is it? They keep killing people and having to pay these settlements. Just think about that. Even if you don't care about the person, think about that. What is the impact on your community if your community, especially a small place like Kenosha,
yeah,
if they're paying hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, what don't you get in those kind of situations? So all we're looking for is some empathy. All we're looking for is some common sense in these situations, and that feeds into the reaction.
It's a lot there.
Yeah.
A lot there. I think that I mean, for me, it's hard to justify it in any way, somebody being shot in the back multiple times. And so I try to, watch a whole lot of different narratives, and purposely I watch different narratives so I can just kind of see how people are framing things, or the logic behind how people actually come up with the conclusions that they make. I'm open to a lot of things. I haven't heard anything compelling enough, regardless of walking to the car, being told I walk to the car, whatever the case may be, to be shot in the back. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh no, it exposes that the real issue is I want control over that black body. Like, bluntly, that's what I see in this shit over and over again. This person was not under my control, and I should have control over him.
I think I don't disagree with you, but I also think it's a value. Again, at the end of the day, if that wasn't on video, we would have never heard about it. It would have been another little note in the newspaper somewhere, and we'd have moved on to the next person got shot. And again, that's where all this frustration comes from. And the unique thing about this current generation, these Gen Z folks, is they don't have any problem with saying, no, this is not going to work for us.
Yeah.
That's their whole principle. We're not like y'all. We're not putting up with certain things, and they're pushing us forward. So
I-
because of that, I see it getting better long term, but it's going to be incremental. We're not going to see the drastic change, but incremental is going to get better.
I really do wonder, like when you were mentioning the Rodney King video, and it dawns on me, okay, so that was probably, in my experience, the first time that I'd really come face to face with that kind of with that narrative in an indisputable way, right? Does that make sense? So it's one thing to have
Mhm.
my friends tell me stuff, but then here I'm seeing it and going, I can't fucking explain this away. This was just messed up. Um, and then I think about kids is G. You mentioned Gen Z. Well, they have seen because they're on TikTok, they're on
Mhm.
Instagram, they're on the social media where visual is everything, and where the repeated viewing of these things is part of what these social media platforms are all about. So there's a way in which, even though I'm mid 40s, these young folks have seen videos of black bodies being looted this way more times in their 20 years than I
Mm.
have as mine in my 40 plus,
Mm.
right? Like that.
Right.
What's the impact of that? What?
It's the same kind of thing. It's when you grow up in areas that are troubled. I guess that's the way I'm gonna frame this. You see those kind of things and you kind of wash it away. So if you see the
Yeah.
cops rough somebody up, there was a thin thing that you can justify that to. But what you see it starts to progress. So it goes from being your your grandfather, your father to your uncles that are closer to you. Then it's your turn to go through these same kind of things.
Yeah.
And it's a rite of passage. You can't find a black man, too many black men that are my age, in their early 40s, that haven't had one of these experiences somewhere in their background where they had these experiences, and it sticks with them. So as a parent, when I try to relay this information to my children, I'm relaying to something that they don't understand, but they know is wrong. They know it's wrong. They like, I don't understand how someone can actually be treated like that. Now, that makes no
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah.
And the sad part is they have to go through that too, regardless.
Yeah.
And I'm just fortunate that they've had minimal experience with that, but they still had to go through it.
So
Yeah.
so let me ask y'all a question. So how do we move from a all or none narrative around attacking what the issue is? Because one of the challenges that I have, I have a problem when anybody says all of anybody, right? So all men, all women, all blacks, all whites. And I know that when people say it, they don't mean it per se, like the millions of people. But how do we start to have a narrative to where we talk about reimagining public safety, which is how I articulate it, because words matter, and holding each other accountable, not only within public safety or policing, but also within the Native Black American community, where we're separating those people who are perpetrating in those areas from the people who want to make it better or come up with solutions. Because I think that's where it becomes triggering for a lot of people, not necessarily for me,
Yeah.
but it's like people hear defund the police, right? Now, personally, I think the phrase, if we were literally talking about defunding police, I think that would be the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Personally, right? Now, because when I think defund, I'm thinking, most people are thinking absolute, take all the money away or don't have them. And I know that's being used as a weapon too, but I'm just saying how the brain would work. But if we're saying, listen, we are a people, we are a country, we are a nation that wants to progressively get better, and we have problems where a significant community within our larger community has an issue, I don't understand why that would be triggering to anybody to say, how do we make this better and reimagining it?
Because
That's what I don't understand.
we have huge swaths of this country who are not interested in moving forward. They want to turn the clock back, the good old days.
Mhm.
I want it back like it was. Like
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
I mean, the first conflict comes in with the assumption of a value that we want to move into the 21st century.
I think that the biggest thing is that again we start talking about the wrong things.
Hmm.
No one wants crime in their community. in any way.
True.
Right. Right.
Especially the Black community, because those communities, any minority community, are victimized more because of socioeconomic status than anything else. So once you start there, you start to look at it. I remember when they put in the 94 crime bill, because you actually seen the results. You saw people come off the streets. Now, the whole mass incarceration wasn't what they wanted in the beginning, but everybody forget how bad crack was on the street.
Listen.
You saw families deteriorate in front of your face.
Yeah.
During that time, you saw your community go from being a working class community to crime-filled areas. So in some cases, you actually saw those things happen. I remember walking to school, you step on crack vials. I remember those kind of things. So when you saw that bill come through and they put more police on the street, that's true. They arrested a lot of people, that's true. But at the time it was needed because that's how bad it was on the street.
Well,
so when you pull that
there's
back,
other ways we can deal with it though. Like
that's true. But at the time they needed an immediate impact because it had gotten so bad on the streets. So when you peel that back, you start to think about the impact. So that's what we want to fix. Everything doesn't need a hammer. You could put a chisel to some of those things. We didn't want to put millions of people in jail. That wasn't the intent, but we needed to get some things off the streets. We just needed that at that time. So the whole idea that nobody wants law and order and all those kind of things, that's a misnomer. We're not looking even at history in the correct way if we're starting on that argument in that direction.
But you do know that when you watch these different media outlets or social media outlets, they're using these trigger words to get people to just shut off just by saying stuff like that, though. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And this is why I always talk about being a good citizen. And like I said before, I look at stuff from a financial standpoint. So being a good consumer is doing your research on what you're putting your money to. So you're just doing the same thing with your vote, with what your actual power is. So what's going on in my local area? If I have my local area and they say, hey, we're going to push something like school choice as an example, what does that actually mean? So if I live in an area with a lot of renters, we're not getting the same value out of school choice versus I live in an area with a lot of homeowners. You're not getting the same benefit. All you're doing is shifting resources. So the school I want to send my family to, because they got small class sizes, guess what happened next year? I got to send them to another school because now we got large class sizes at the school I just sent them to. So it's understanding all those things. And again, I think people got so busy and people are not taking the time to look at a lot of the things that goes in the background, not looking at the history of how we got here. It's easy to sit here and say, the country is built on white supremacy, but it's also what have people done over time to get us here? What have we allowed for people to do over time to get us here?
So when you say that though, are you speaking specifically to like Native Black Americans? What have we allowed, or just people, allies in general?
I'm talking to everyone in general, and then you can focus that down to the Black community. It's things that were fine when I was 20 years old. That's not fine now as a 42-year-old man. So when you go back and forth with these kind of things, you get to see that. But you become, again, I said I worked in the barbershop when I was a kid, and you would hear these same kind of conversation. I'm talking about 25 years ago. So when you get to sit down and you get to look at these things, we have to take that responsibility. We have to do the things that this current generation is doing. They'll pull out their phone and they're not just TikToking and all that kind of stuff. They're looking up stuff. They're saying, hey, I read this. I'm trying to understand it. I want to have these discussions, and you need people that's available to give them this kind of context. So I think it's a lot of pieces that go with it, and it's easy to point to small pieces in there, but we got to do better in general of holding our leaders accountable, and we got to do better at holding ourselves accountable.
So there's been a bunch of comments. Yeah. So
I'll pull up the last one.
I think you're nailing it. A full narrative is invaluable. Yeah. Huge.
Yep. Thanks, Desmond. Appreciate that.
TL had a couple of zingers in there too.
Of course. Oh, what did he say? He said, TL, dispel the myths, call people on it. Now, what part? I don't remember what part he was referring to when he said that, though.
I mean, about some of the things Rashan was just saying, that like wider conversation. And it's I'm also like TL mentioned earlier, seeing the videos in the Freedom Riders, and are you here? There we go. It just happened.
We're here.
Okay, I
Yeah, I'm
lost you
here.
for a second. But TL's comment: have you ever seen the videos of what happened to riders when they sat at counters? And interesting, because I'm sitting here going, yeah, I have seen videos. Thing in my head as I realized those were, if not always, in black and white, and like how different stuff is. Like, because you're right, TL, I totally didn't even had seen those prior to the Rodney King thing, but what an impact visuals do have. And then way up above my around both of the events in Kenosha, or the two major events in Kenosha. I guess I understand that there are complications to this whole thing, but it's not as simple as self-defense. The kid that shot two people, he was carrying a military weapon on a fucking street in the US. That's not, it was unnecessary. He traveled there to shoot people of color. That was what he wanted to go do. I'm not letting him off. So yeah, all right, we can claim defense. Defense against rocks is you pick up a rock and you throw it back. You whip out an AR-15 and you blow two people, three people. Sorry, just not okay. Number one. Number two, when we're talking about Blake's, the knife that he supposedly had on him. Now, part of what I don't know is this a guy who's scared shitless going, dude, I've got a pocket knife in my pocket and I don't want to be fucking killed over a pocket knife. Like when we talk about widening the conversation, we have to look beyond these key things, these key words that people talk about. That yeah, and I think you're right, Mike. Do need to be retrained, and social needs have to be looked at. I think you're nailing it there, man.
So Mike Robinson.
I do want to respect my cops. I want to respect authority. When I see stuff like this, I lose all respect. I have sorry, but power over people is not what I need from my cops, and that's what we're seeing.
I think is very simple. This particular case is very simple. Where have any of us in any experience seen where it's okay to shoot somebody in the back? Ever? I mean, it's really that simple.
Yeah, I mean that's how I started. That's my whole thing. Like, when is that ever acceptable?
It's never acceptable, but it gets into some of the traps that we fall into as a society. Of if I say X, you have to say Y, which is ridiculous on its face.
Yeah,
we need to have the same level of understanding about a topic, and I think that one of the things, and I was mentioning in the pre-show about talking to people on Facebook and other social medias about complex issues. It's not the right venue for it. I personally think, and what it does is it causes you to get in arguments and reevaluate the people that you thought were your friends. So you spend a lot of time doing that and spend a lot of time arguing. I know I personally have. And again, when you get back to it, the simplest answer sometimes is the only answer. It's never been okay anywhere in our culture to shoot anybody in the back. You think about the old Westerns. If you shoot somebody in the back, you're a coward. You're branded a coward. Everybody knows you're a coward, and you got to carry that with you. All we're asking for in this particular case is for justice to follow through. And this is how you get the level of protest that we get, is because we'll get past this first step sometime. And then when we get to the next step, we get no resolution on any of these cases. This is what the Trayvon Martin case proved to us. It proved that we can be the voice to get someone arrested, but we can't be the voice to get someone prosecuted.
Oh hell! All we did was make him a rich man. I mean, he got to sell that gun for $500,000.
Exactly. Now think about what kind of world we live in where somebody would even want that.
Yeah. That's the scary part for me, just from a human standpoint. I mean, the fact that somebody wants that as a collector's item for whatever reason that they want it, or the fact that you could walk up to someone and consciously or subconsciously, because I really don't know, have such a dehumanized value for them that you shoot them multiple times when they can't even see it coming. Because I'm with you, Rashan. I mean, I'm open to so many different things. I get it. I'll try to take it in and process it. Even if I don't agree with it, I'll try to my best to understand your logic. But I have not found one piece of logical sequence that justifies 7 shots in the back of somebody who is leaning over a car.
And that's correct. And I think that again, people feel like they have to go to their corner nowadays. So even in our political leaders, you're seeing them try to take a side in a situation that is very clear to everybody. This is not what we do.
Yeah.
So that confounds the issue. And this is how you get like the kid that was on the street with the AR-15. This is how you get to that point.
Yeah.
And then that kid feeling like I'm in this situation, you know, like Torian said, where is meaning? Have meaning. So if you talk about riot and war on the streets and things like that, that gets people in that kind of mind frame.
It does.
So if you're in that kind of mind frame, things like that happen. And it's scary, but I have faith that down the line, the things going to get incrementally better. And we're going to see
I saw Royce's face.
we're going to see some of the things that we're asking for because
I'm
you
going
can't keep the status quo.
No, you're right. You're right. My brain goes 2 directions on that. First,
do you think, man?
And Angela's comment, like her mention of like when she sat on a police advisory commission. Yeah, like I feel like every time we see one of these stories, I have to have it up in front of people, at least from my perspective, because I know, well, within the Native Black American community, this conversation's been going on a long time. Bluntly, for white folks, it's not something we have conversations about nearly as often. So the other thing is, and TL's mentioning, you know, tons of people are making an argument for resisting arrest. So apparently resisting arrest is now punishable by death. That's I mean, that's the argument that's being made there. Anyway, the thing that really concerns me, Rashan, is the notion of the National Guard being sent in. Up to this point in Kenosha, all of the National Guard call-ups for the National Guard interdictions have been local National Guard. Not the way you put down a civil war. It's not put down civil unrest. You call in troops from out of state, right? And that's what's happening here. They called up Arizona National Guard to go into Kenosha, Wisconsin. That was the point at which I said to Torian, I'm scared shitless now. Because we are not nearly as likely to see people as our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors when we are called across that state line as we are when we are called in our own backyard. And that for me was a major red flag turning point of, oh shit, we're still flipping a Yui here.
Well, I think that the idea that these folks that are being called in from cross state lines have, as far as the military is concerned, are there to do something outside of their role and responsibility. I think that's a misnomer too. Those folks are trained. Those folks are responsible. Those folks they're going to follow their instructions, but they're not going to go beyond that line. Because I mean, their training is very clear on what they're supposed to do. The point to what you're talking about is the fact that you have to do that. That those things are happening across the country where you usually don't see that unless it's a national emergency, floods and earthquake kind of thing. The idea is, again, that the people have to we have to voice our concern for these kind of things. So I'm gonna give you an example, again, from a money standpoint. Right. When you call up the National Guard for your state, the state pays, right? So now you have Arizona residents paying for unrest in Kenosha. So when you think about it from that, if I'm a resident of Arizona, do I want my tax money going to that? Is that something that I really want? And that's where you make your voice heard. Now, and then add that on top of what we have going on with the pandemic. So, you know, we got 30 million people-ish out of work, right?
Yep.
You got states that are running in the negative.
Yep.
So what do states do to raise revenue? They raise taxes. So how many times you gonna keep raising my taxes because you sending the National Guard to another state?
Yep. And
So I mean, it's a lot of those conversations that we can have at the local level to address that kind of stuff.
it's
Never thought
a
about that.
huge point. It's a huge
Never
point.
thought about that.
Yep.
Wow. Wow. So I mentioned when I introduced you that you've been married for, I'm not switching gears, I'm trying to make a connection. Been married over 20 years, 24 years to be exact.
Yep.
I know your wife very well, good people. But tell us about, from a family standpoint, or how about this? I'm gonna ask you a broader question. Just tell me what family values means to you. What does that mean to you?
My family is everything, and the values that you instill in your kid is what your legacy is. You know, when you're chasing it, when you're in your accumulation phase, which we are in right now, you're trying to put resources behind that family. But what they're going to carry on is those values that you instilled in them. I'm very proud to say that my kids have a great work ethic. So they're about getting it. They're about to going out there getting it so that they can have the things that they want, and they want to make sure that they're in a position to help other people, which I know I wasn't there when I was their age.
Right.
So me and my wife, we put a lot of emphasis on it, and I'm very fortunate that my wife can spend a lot of time with them while I'm out doing different things to take care of the family, and she can focus and nurture them in that kind of development. I think it's been great. We were just talking about it the other day, is because we get to move around so much, our kids, their experience and their background is totally different than mine. So they see those values. The hard part is, like I said before, it's going to be some experiences that you have to watch them going through. And just recently, we had to watch my daughter go through a situation where she had to encounter racism. It wasn't to the same extent that I learned it, but I'm fortunate that she has that experience, so she knows how to recognize it. And I'm glad that she didn't have to go through it in a very negative light to get that experience.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you talk about the racism piece, we got some comments that kind of tie back your comments to policing and militarization. Let me see if I can pull that up there.
And Mike's
so Kate says
too, like both of them are real.
Really, so I don't know if you can read it, but Bear saying there's a huge difference between those who are military and law enforcement officials, and the type of training or random people who have guns. So in the context, you're talking about experiencing racism, and then focusing kind of on policing, which is what we're talking about. But a lot of people are saying, hey, the police have become the military force on the street in certain neighborhoods. There's a military mindset behind that. Like, what are your thoughts around that, man, as a person whose whole career has been in the military?
Well, again, I think that the unique thing about the military is that we have a singular mission, to defend the country. It's so much nuance that goes into what a police officer has to encounter and deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
When you send the military somewhere, the military is going to go there and do that mission. If the mission is to go take out an enemy, that's exactly what they're going to go do. You can't police your populace the same way. You can't go into every situation ready to take people down. You just can't do that. And that's where the argument for defunding, which is not the right word, but that's where that argument comes in. Who else can we bring to that table? And that's one of the things that the military does fantastic. If there's another agency that can come in to help with this situation, we're bringing them in. It doesn't always have to be us that are in there taking care of these situations. And I think that again, you have to look at the history. The police departments got militarized as part of our response to terrorism.
Yep.
So, but because we went through that, and again, people react a certain way when they're scared. We were fine with giving military equipment to police departments without thinking about what do they use that for.
Yep.
So when you watch videos and seeing the same vehicles that are out there on the battlefield rolling up on city streets, I mean, it doesn't give you the right picture, which gets back to what do we want those resources to go to? How do we want people to handle situations? Torian knows I have a special needs child. Me and him about the same size. His reaction in the situation is not going to be what a normal reaction is going to be. Do I need a militarized police officer coming to handle that situation, or would I rather have a social worker come handle that situation? I mean, that's what we have to think about. And if we come to the consensus that that's what we want, we have to hold our leaders accountable. We got the most power at the local level. So if you're going to your local city council or your local town to get these things done, that's what we need to do. We need to put just as much energy as we put in these national things to our local things to get a better impact.
That's a great point. And I think so many people, but specifically when we talk about racism, we talk about policing, miss that. Just even, how a sheriff is different from, a county officer and what those things, like just even the structure. And so that's why it becomes difficult for me when people are so polarizing in their thoughts, but they don't even understand the nuance of how things are structured to even defend their argument. So yeah, local is important.
And it's interesting, this notion of defunding the police, because when you actually read what it's about, it's different than they're calling for the abolishment of police. And they actually have two different, like, how you can for you want to do, but you're exact. Defunding the is not necessarily saying no police whatsoever. It's saying shift the police drastically and shift the scope of and be more inclusive in who's responding to emergencies. And starts to sound very different than abolish the police, which really is an argument doing away with policing.
Nobody wants that. No, I mean, listen, nobody wants that. You can say you want it.
I want to explore it more because there are some unanswered questions for me. I'm like, all right, there's just some basics here that have to get taken care of somewhere,
So if you have ever had to walk through different neighborhoods, that may have had different gangs or crews or whatever they're called in certain places, you realize that there is a policing mechanism that exists, whether we have a formal police officer department or not. Sometimes they call them warlords. They call them a lot of different things, right? And so what I'm saying is that when we say that, we have to be very clear. And that's why these words matter. When I hear defund the police, I'm not triggered by most things, but I'm like, but we're using the wrong word. And the same thing in this situation. If we're talking about reallocating resources, reimagining and revisioning what it should look like. And again, if we say we are people who are always in the pursuit of excellence, that shouldn't be triggering to anyone, including for me if I'm a police officer, because I want to get better. But it goes back to your point that some people want to keep things the same. I just want to level set for the context, is because when I watch different shows and I hear people, I even read some people's responses, it's like people hear one word, they hear booger, and that's it. Like that one word, and all communication, all hearing has stopped. And that's something that to me, I really want to try to bridge a gap on most things.
I think that again, we're not looking at the right stuff. So when that whole phrase defund the police came out, it wasn't a fixed plan. Nobody produced that as legislation or anything like that. This was just something that someone said. It's an idea that's thrown out there, and anybody with any experience knows the first idea that's thrown out there to solve the problem might be a piece of the final answer. So as a piece, the idea is, hey, let's defund the police and reallocate those funds to something else. The piece that got picked up was defund, and people spun that to what they wanted. But at the end of the day, what we want those resources that you, me, and everybody else pay our tax money to go to actually go to things that benefit us. And this is not it. The police have a hard job, and they're kind of in a no-win situation with the fact that with a high school diploma and 8 weeks of training, I'm supposed to go in there and deal with advanced psychological situations
Oh, yeah.
or domestic abuse or any of that kind of stuff. That doesn't make any sense.
No, it
Advanced
doesn't.
psychological situations. I'm going to use that in all my conversations now.
I mean, you're talking about somebody like you're exactly right. 8 weeks of training versus, you know, even just a BA in social work plus the specialized training to actually do clinical social work. Like, yeah, you can't compare the two. Like, reason there's a huge process for people doing that work. There's a lot to it that has to be disassembled and dismantled.
And I'll also say, but there's also a lot to police officers too. Like we can't use the minimum standard as the whole. And again, that's always my reasoning coming into things. And there's a wide variety of people that are doing different things. But again, to me, that variety is if we truly are about being better and being excellent. And that's what I always challenge people on, because when people are triggered by talking about reimagining, reforming, whatever the case may be,
how many times are we going to reform the police? I mean, there's the argument for using a new phrase right there. Like, I've heard the term police reform since the day I was born, and none of it's been reformed. It's all shit.
I think that's another big thing is how's it going to be packaged? What's the strategic narrative around these programs that they're talking about? I mean, there's current legislation out there for police reform that's going to address some of these systemic issues that happen all over the country. But again, at your local police department, I live in a small town right now. At that town level, we don't have that many police. So the same idea for reforming is not going to fit there. The idea would be is how much diversity we have in the police force. And the police force in my town is not that much. So, and then what other resources do they have? Again, minimum standard is high school. A lot of places you might need an associate's degree. But again, if I'm walking into a complex situation with that kind of skill level as a person, any person, that's a lot to deal with. And if I had another resource that was able to come in to help me, I would welcome that. And I think that that's what we have to get to. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that we have that MBA mind frame with dealing with all situations. Everything has to be quantified and everything has to be validated. And these aren't these kind of situations. I feel the same thing about schools that I feel about the police. Those aren't investments. Those are requirements.
That's interesting. Those say more about that.
Again, the idea that again that we have to quantify the education, like I was mentioning before about school choice. If this shifting that resource instead of resourcing all the schools, just resource all the schools, and we'll have the great schools across the board instead of trying to split the difference. It's the same thing with the police. If the police have a vital function to provide safety for everybody, then they need to be resourced with everything possible that they can have. So
not just guns and military.
No, I mean it could be that they need that. I lived in New York. In New York, they need that kind of stuff.
Right. Some places,
some places need it.
Well,
but every place doesn't need it.
Should there be a unit with that? Okay, but like for every cop on the street to have a gun, it's not needed.
Well, I would say that it is needed. Is needed. The problem is that when there's misconduct, what is the follow up on that? So, you know, we have a system where prosecutors have all the power. So the guy I work next to every day, he gets to decide whether I get to stand trial. And then he gets to prosecute me if I do stand trial. That makes no sense neither. So it's envisioning what we actually want. It's a difference between fairness and equity.
Yeah.
As far as dealing with the police, we want fairness. As far as dealing in the court system, we want equity. We want people to actually look like us on our juries. We want people with shared experience so that they understand what we're going through. Because if I'm afraid of the police, if I don't trust the police, if I don't feel like they're coming to fix my problem, how often am I going to try to fix my own problem?
Yeah.
What's the likelihood that I'm calling the police? And if I know that they're going to exacerbate the situation?
Yeah. I mean, for people out there, check out John Oliver's show from a couple of weeks ago. He does a great breakdown on this, and he study that looked at at juries, and I think this study was Florida, but juries, all white juries convicted people of color at a rate 16 times higher. And just one person of color on the jury evened the whole fucking thing out. But that sat alongside all these training videos that taught prosecutors how to weed people of color out of the jury. Like, so let's be clear. This is, number one, a deliberate systemic thing. We aren't just going for a fair, people are going for number one, and number two. So for those of us who want to trust prosecutors, it's not, yeah. And number two, what happens when we don't say yes to jury selection? Like, we have to be serving on these things. We have to be doing that. And we have to be making sure that that our juries have variety in them. I mean,
and I totally agree with that. And I actually saw that episode that you're speaking on. And that's what I'm saying about the whole situation. It's the idea that I have a responsibility as a citizen.
yeah, yep.
I have a responsibility as a citizen, and I'm going to do my part. If I do my part, you do your part. Then certain things that we can work out. Like if we all got together and was talking about jury selection, how is it a fact that you could weed out minorities out of your juries and nobody says nothing? Is no document, is no report, is no nothing that needs to go with it. You could just do it. That makes no sense.
Well, see, and that's always my issue with things, is where I know that, you know, there are races and all these things exist. It's when people don't say anything and we're complicit in it that bothers me, right? Because you may not be that, but when we allow it, we're empowering it to go forward. And
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to. So anybody's listening and any of the viewers, as you're having conversation, that's what eradicating racism and sexism and ageism is all about. It's about not being particularly from the community in which someone identifies, but still standing up and being firm around standing up, just like you were a part of it. That's how we get rid of it.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, having these conversations, and again, I mentioned earlier about having these conversations over social media is not the best forum for that.
Yeah.
Because I always say the folks that I had these arguments with would never say this in my face. So that lets you know. So that lets you know the strength of those arguments. That lets you know right up front.
I want to throw out there like a question. Like, I don't know if we can close on this, but
yeah, you got it. Close it out.
All right. So what's it like to talk to your white friends right about all this shit?
It's
you want me to answer that?
You go first. I need a second.
You got it. No, you want me to go first? Seriously?
Yeah, you can go first.
So talking to my white friends about this. Well, it depends on who I'm talking to. Number one, I'm fully aware that I have friends, or, you know, people that I relate to, friends, some even brothers, I would say, that don't feel that this is a real thing and is not important. So I've learned to listen a lot more than I speak, and especially in times like this. So my biggest litmus test for this is, if you consider yourself my friend and you're white, have you asked me how I'm doing? Like, how you doing through all this? No, it's not about you, not about you feeling guilty, whatever. We're friends. You see something that's going on in the community, but I do identify with. Hey man, you good? Like, that right there is putting you in a whole nother category. Then you can start to have conversations around policing and was this right? But I want to know, if we're really friends, we should be able to have scratchy, vulnerable conversations about things that I don't know about or you don't know about, but you really care about me. So that alleviates a lot of people, because you can split that right up. But then it becomes uncomfortable too, because I don't believe that the majority of people are outwardly like trying to be racist and even want to buy into the system, right? It's the apathy of not trying to become more aware and grow in areas that you don't identify. Yeah. Because in business, we talk about growth all the time, right? But we don't talk about, as men, let's just throw out there, women's issues until it's like an immediate emergency in front of us, as opposed to it being like, no, like sexism is happening, man. We know it's happening. Even when we're talking in the locker room or boardroom or whatever we are, that's happening. We have to make sure that we are allocating resources to fight against it, including our time and our voice. And not everybody is ready to have that conversation, and I'm cool with that. So my thing is, I meet people where they are. Try to hold as much space as I possibly can. But when people are outwardly negative, derogatory, racist, I tell them how I feel, and then they don't hear from me anymore. So, if you don't hear from me, then you probably know why.
Well, I would say that I wish I took your path a little bit more than I do, because I like to argue sometimes. And my wife would tell me all the time, stop Facebook beefing. But I think the part that bugs me the most about this is the fact that no matter what I say or what I present as evidence for that discussion, whatever that particular discussion is, the person feels like they have to take a opposite argument, like they're losing traction to me if they take my point. So that's where the hard part comes. And some people, again, you're just not going to reach, and you have to get to that point to say, okay, well, in this area, we're just not going to talk about it no more. And if it grows out of that, then we can't be associates anymore. But yeah, I spend a lot of time arguing with people, so it's a funny thing to go through, and it's funny how you can have so many emotions about people sometimes that you never even met. About these points that goes around, but I think that shows the thirst people have for that interactions with people. I think that is more complicated than what the actual topic is. It shows that some people just need to have somebody to have that outward communication with for them to be able to function, and I think that's a lot of things that go into it too.
Yeah, it's real, man. I know we can keep going, and we will.
And we will.
But for the sake of the show right now, Rashan, anything else? Anything you want to leave the audience with, where they can be more, be better, be different? Any last words that you would like to close out with, man?
The only thing I would, first thing I'll thank y'all again for allowing me to be on your show. I really, I'm glad to have these conversations in a way that may impact some folks and just make you think about some things. And I think
the
at the end,
comments have been amazing. If you're looking at comments, have been, so
and I think again at the end of the day, it's what we do as a collective. We're not going to get anywhere on our own. If you're a black, a native black, it's not enough of us to get anything done on our own. We need allies, and we're not going to get anywhere pushing allies away. So
see that for some people can be triggering too, bro. I've had this conversation too, and people are like, no, there are people that I know, some may even be listening right now, that are upset with me for having this show with Royce.
And
how
again,
you're doing this with a white man right now.
But what I would argue is, why wouldn't you? Especially at this time.
Exactly. That's what I say.
Is we need that variety in our voice, because sometimes in our community we could say, hey, we need to be separated from, and we need to do our own thing. I think in some veins that's true, and I think in some veins we need to have internal conversations. But what we're talking about at a national level, that's going to impact all of us. We need to have allies that understand these situations, whether you understand it from an empathetic standpoint or you understand it from a financial standpoint. We need you to be on our side in this argument, in this fight, to make sure that we have a better world for not only our children and grandchildren, but for all the generations after.
All right. I think we'll leave it at that. Drop the mic on that one, my brother. Well, listen, man, I definitely appreciate it. We're going to put you in the green room real fast, close it out, and then we're going to circle back around. So we'll put you down for a minute, and then we'll come back, all right?
All right. Thanks again.
All right, man.
Thank you, Rashan. Sure.
Whew. All right, man. How you feeling about that one?
Good. I'm just a lot to think about. I'm so grateful for Rashan being willing to jump into this and I love him, man. What do you say?
He is he is one of the most thoughtful people that I remember, like that story I told, we connected right away, and we just went down rabbit holes for like hours. So, and we, we'll probably bring him back because obviously we could have kept talking, but just, I like some of the comments that he made around, the difference between policing and military, and the nuance around policing, and it's different, right? It's not just one singular mission, although it's looking like that it's activated in that way. But, my stance is always going to be, I think now is the perfect time to be having a more collective conversation, which, isn't happening. In fact, I think it's fueling the future, particularly with this election that's coming up, where we're getting more, more identity polls and identity silos that are actually happening.
The other thing I have to put a shout out there on, like y'all in the comments, y'all been going at it. Like this is Amber, Janine, like our guest from last week, Kate, TL, Terry, there a couple of like just
Nima, girl
Nima.
Yeah.
She was in there too. Just thank you guys, because it means so much to have, like, because I don't know about you, Torian, but like my brain's going like, oh God, there's a whole rabbit hole. Oh, there's another rabbit hole. Oh, here,
all day.
and then I'll see questions. I'm like, all right, we're going to go down that one. Let's pull that one up and go down. So thank you guys for
and that's the thing, but you guys make Where's Your Heart. That's what it is. I mean, this show, we're trying to hold the space, but it's the engagement, making sure that everybody is a part of the conversation. So we appreciate it. And, pass the word if you think people need space in which they can celebrate vulnerability as a core human strength. Please make sure that you pass on Where's Your Heart, and send us some ideas for topics too, because there's plenty to talk about, but we'd love to hear more from the audience that tunes in on a regular basis. All right, man. So with that, got to wrap it up, and we'll see and talk.